welcome back to my channel. My name is Emily and this is my channel, Em Reads, and welcome back to Bookmas. So today I wanted to talk about my favorite reads of 2025. This is not favorite reads of books that came out in 2025, but books that I read in 2025. Actually, I don't think a single book, actually I know not a single book on this list came out in 2025. I think this year I actually only read 2 books that were published this year. I think maybe 3. I think one of those was the most recent Fourth Wing book, and another was The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. I think that's it. I think everything else came out before. I'm not really a recent releases reader primarily. I mostly read backlist titles, some classics, and things like that, which I think you will see is represented in this list. So these are not numbered in any way, shape, or form, in no particular order. These are just some of my favorite reads that I read this year. I read a little over 50 books this year, which is pretty standard for me. I'm not someone who's going to read 100 books in a year. I'm just not. I have kids, I have a job. It's just not going to happen. But these are some of my reads. I will mention my favorite reread as well. I'm not going to include any rereads in the main list because I think rereads is kind of a bit of a different category, sort of, but I will tell you what my favorite reread of the year was. So let's just get into it. We will start off with some honorable mentions first. So for my honorable mentions, the first is The Quiet American by Graham Greene. I'd never read a Graham Greene novel before, and now I want to read a lot of them. I was very surprised at how much I liked this. This is arguably an espionage novel. It's a very short read, but this is based in Vietnam. Our main characters are a British reporter who is covering the French-Vietnamese conflict prior to America's main involvement. We also have an American who is there conducting some espionage potentially, and then we have a Vietnamese woman. And this was a really interesting novel, raises a lot of questions, very discussable in my opinion. So if you're interested in Graham Greene at all, and I don't know that this is where you should start because it's the only one I've read, but it did pique my interest enough that I want to read more of him. And there's also a movie adaptation, or multiple, I guess, but the one I watched was the one with Michael Caine and Brendan Fraser, and it was a great movie. So The Quiet American by Graham Greene. Our next honorable mention was The Warden by Anthony Trollope. I also had never read Anthony Trollope before, and this was my introduction to him. And I'm glad this was my introduction to him. I really loved it. It is about a small community. It's about people who are all trying to do the right thing as they believe it, but despite them all having honorable intentions, bad things can still happen. And it's just kind of about what results from people seeking justice. And yeah, I don't know, this was a really good, interesting novel. Again, I think very discussable. I still want to do like a one-off review video of this. So hopefully I'll be able to get to that in the new year as well. Okay, the next honorable mention should be no surprise to any regular viewer of my channel. But it is The Memory of Old Jack by Wendell Berry. As most of you probably know, I adore Wendell Berry, and this is one of his shorter novels. You could probably call it a novella. But it is about Jack Beecham, who is one of our lifelong residents of Port William, which is Wendell Berry's fictional town in Kentucky where most of his stories take place. And it is Jack as a very old man remembering the different points in his life that were really pivotal to him. Many of them tragic, and just how they shaped his life. And this was really touching. I really, really enjoyed this. So, yeah, I recommend all of Berry's work, but I really enjoyed The Memory of Old Jack. Okay, and lastly, a bit of a different pick. This was one that I read before I started my BookTube channel this year, so I've never talked about it on here, I don't think. But it's actually a play called Inherit the Wind by Jerome Lawrence and Robert E. Lee, the playwright. But this is essentially a retelling, a recreation of the famous Scopes monkey trial in Tennessee. And this was fascinating. I really enjoyed this. I would love to probably search around on YouTube or somewhere and see if there's like a video of an actual stage performance of this, because I think it would be really interesting. But this has kind of inspired me to maybe kind of read some books about the actual trial next year. So if you're interested in law or United States legal history, or just the religion versus science debate in general, if you like courtroom dramas, then I would maybe suggest finding this and picking it up. You can probably find it at a used bookstore or something like that. Okay, so that's it for the honorable mentions, but now before we get into our main list, I want to talk about my favorite reread of the year. And I reread a few things this year, including Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. I reread Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe by Fannie Flagg, which was almost my pick for this. I reread a memoir written by Rick Bragg. So there were a few good ones on there for me to pick from, but I think kind of without a doubt, my favorite reread of the year was To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I've reread this book several times in my life, but it has been several years since I reread it until this summer, and I regret that I waited so long to reread it again. When I read it, it was just, my first thought was, why don't I read this every year? You know, if you have never read this book or you never read it in school, I highly encourage you to pick it up. It follows a young girl, Jean Louise Finch, otherwise known as Scout, in her Alabama hometown. And her father is Atticus Finch, who is a local lawyer, and he has been appointed to represent Tom Robinson, who is a black man who's been accused of a violent crime. And it follows Scout as she comes of age during this period in the South, and the different ethical and moral and cultural questions she has to face, and Atticus's advice to her and how he tries to model how he thinks she should approach these questions. And it's such a timeless story, in my opinion, despite the very specific nature of the themes discussed here. And it's a wonderful, wonderful story. So I could reread this anytime, really. But okay, so let's get into our main list of my favorite reads from 2025. Again, these are in no particular order. I didn't make myself pick 10 or 5 or anything like that. I just went back and looked at the list of the books I read this year and picked what I loved, what books stuck with me the most. Yes, maybe I should say that. This is not a list of the books that I necessarily think are the most well-written books, the books that have the most literary merit or anything like that, but these were just the books that stuck with me, that I kept thinking about, that meant a lot to me. So that's, my criteria is very minimal, just what I liked and what I think is my favorite. I think I did a pretty good job avoiding recency bias when it came to this list. Several of my picks are actually from the first half of the year before I even started my BookTube channel. So I think I did okay on that end of things, but let's just get into the list. So my first one is Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. When I started the year, there were 2 of Austen's 6 major novels that I hadn't read yet, and Mansfield Park was one of them. So I picked this up in January. And I tell you, I have never heard anyone describe Mansfield Park as a page turner, but I could not put this book down. I feel like I had avoided it for a long time because everyone told me I would be really annoyed by Fanny Price and it was just boring and all those things. So I kind of avoided this one, but gosh, this one is in my top 3 Austen novels. It just is. This is now one of my favorites, easily. I think this is potentially Austen's best written novel. It's refined, it's a little tighter. I just really enjoyed it. I did find Fanny Price annoying, but that's just because she's not like me at all, you know? And maybe I should be a little bit more like Fanny Price, but there were times where I just wanted to push her and go, speak up for yourself, Fanny, you know, you can do it. But, and like the love interest is not very exciting, but I don't know, I just was very engrossed in this. I wanted to see where it went. It was great. It was just really, really good. You can kind of see a bit of the underlying Cinderella theme a little bit, with Fanny being kind of the poor relation, and there's some evil stepsisters and things like that. But I mean, very extremely loosely. It's not a retelling by any means, but this was just a great, great novel. So if you've avoided Mansfield Park, I suggest you do not put it off any longer. If you've not read it, make 2026 the year you're going to read it. I don't think you'll regret it. Next, we have the other main Wendell-Berry work that I read this year for the first time, which was Jayber Crow. This novel and Hannah Coulter are Wendell-Berry's probably best known novels. And Jayber Crow follows the main character, Jayber, through his life from the time he's an orphaned child through his adulthood and return to Port William and to his return to its membership there. Many say that Jayber Crow is supposed to be is the character most like Wendell-Berry himself. I think Barry might have said that himself. And it's just, I already want to reread this because I already know that I feel like if I reread it, I'll find even deeper meaning than I did the first time. But, and I did really enjoy reading this after I read Hannah Coulter a year or two ago, because Hannah Coulter is obviously from a female's perspective, and it was really nice to get kind of the male viewpoint on Port William and its community. Hannah Coulter very much featured the female version of that, in my opinion. And so it was nice to kind of get a different picture. And it was nice because Jaber didn't spend his whole life in Port William. He left, and his journey back is interesting and important, and the decisions he makes to get there are important. And it just shows kind of the importance of the quiet decisions you make for your own life that you don't have to broadcast to everybody, but that will still dictate how you live. And yeah, it just, Barry's just great. So I loved Jaber Crow this year. Next, 1776 by David McCullough. This is my lone nonfiction pick on this list, mainly because I didn't really read a lot of nonfiction this year, but I'm amazed I hadn't read this before because I know it's been popular for a really, really long time. But this is McCullough's work about the Revolutionary War, or at least its beginning. And I'd actually never read anything by David McCullough before. He has several other books regarding American history, but this was very readable. And I was just really inspired. I was just very inspired. I read it kind of in anticipation of 2026 being the 250th year since the founding of this country. And this book did just inspire me. The stories of the individual men who gave every ounce of what they had, their courage, their ingenuity, their innovation, their gumption, to supporting a cause, to standing up for what they believed was right. I was just really inspired because it feels like that spirit is kind of lacking in America right now, and I'd really like to see it come back. I would really like to see it come back. But I loved this book, and it kind of inspired me to embark on an American reading project for 2026 and beyond that I'll talk about in another Bookmas video. But I loved 1776. The next we have The Thornbirds by Colleen McCullough. I loved this book. This is a book that was written in the 70s. I believe this is a long, multi-generational family saga about a family that comes from New Zealand to Australia in the outback, and a forbidden love. It is just gorgeous. Colleen McCullough's descriptions of Australia and the Australian outback are stunning. Like, I feel like I can just imagine being there because she steeps you in it so richly. This was a great story. I still need to watch the miniseries. I haven't done it yet, but maybe at some point over this Christmas holiday I will. But this was one of those books that I had kind of found. I really enjoy finding books that, like, my mother's generation and grandmother's generation loved, and this was kind of one of those. So it was really fun to go back and find this novel. But if you've never read it, or like you talk to your mom and she remembers it or something, maybe pick it up. Or yeah, it was just really good. I feel like they don't write books like this anymore. So I really enjoyed it. Okay, then we have, this is my only like fantasy pick, I guess, on this list. And it is The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart. I guess you could call this historical fantasy. This is the first book in Mary Stewart's Arthurian saga. And I really could have picked any of the books in the series, but I do think the first one was my favorite. These are all told from the eyes of Merlin, and the whole series follows him from the time he's a child until he is an old man, and follow his connection with Arthur and part of Arthur's reign and all of that. And it's just gorgeous. I loved Mary Stewart's writing. It was beautiful. I really, really loved this first one because I really enjoyed Merlin as a young boy. I really enjoyed his relationship with his father. That was one of the most touching parts of this whole series for me. But if you are interested in Arthurian retellings or even just kind of historical fantasy in general, I would really recommend picking up Mary Stewart's books. These were a very pleasant surprise for me. Okay, and then we have, this is probably my the pick that shocked me the most for this list. And it is The Spy Who Came In From the Cold by Jean Le Carré. I had never read Jean Le Carré before. I have not read much spy fiction before, but I read this as part of the Dr. November reading event, which is all about reading spy fiction. And this was great. You can't tell who's playing who, but this is more than just a spy novel. This has much more depth to it. It's much more quote unquote literary than just an action spy novel. This was really good. This is one that I wanted to reread as soon as I finished it because I wanted to go back and see what I had missed the first time around. And this has definitely inspired me to read more Le Carré. So maybe I'll get to that next year. We'll see. My last pick is another work of Southern literature, which I'm very fond of. But it is All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren. This is a book that follows Willie Stark, who is loosely based on the former Louisiana governor Huey Long. This book is dark, full of corruption, greed, power, but man, it's great. It's really good. This was also very readable. It's a long book. My copy is just under 700 pages, but it reads quickly to me. I never read anything by Warren before, so I was kind of unfamiliar with how his prose would be, but it was great. This is a book that made me think about the Flannery O'Connor quote that is fairly famous about the South not being Christ-centered, but being Christ-haunted, which is a quote that I've kind of, struggled with over time and whether or not, with how much I adhere to it. But, and I felt it in this book because Warren's prose is filled with biblical and religious language and imagery, which you wouldn't necessarily catch if you weren't familiar with it. But if you are familiar with it, you'll see it everywhere in here. But by the same token, in the actual story, the absolute absence of God is palpable. He is nowhere to be found in this book or in these characters at all. So that contrast was very stark to me and lent a lot of heaviness and darkness to the story. But even though it was so heavy and just kind of like looming, this was a great novel. If you're interested in Southern literature, I recommend it. If you're interested in political novels, I recommend it. This did win the Pulitzer Prize back in 1947, so quite a while ago, but a wonderful novel if you're doing a Pulitzer project or Southern literature. So those are my favorite reads of 2025. I would love to know what yours are. What were your favorite reads this year? Did you have any favorite rereads? Yeah, what are your criteria to make your favorite reads of 2025? Mine are just kind of very arbitrary, just what I liked. But I would love to know what your favorite reads were. And thank you for being here for this day of Bookmas. And I'll see everyone again tomorrow for tomorrow's video. Thanks. Bye.